Please join me in welcoming to the stage voting rights activist and author Stacey Abrams and founder and CEO of Rewiring America, Ari Matusiak, for a live recording of the podcast Zero with our Bloomberg's Akshat Rathi.
Welcome to Zero and welcome to the Bloomberg Green Festival. Now, Ari, let's start with a simple proposition. When we think about climate solutions, one way to think about them is that we need to electrify more and more of our lives. And we need to produce that electricity as carbon-free as possible, ideally fully carbon-free very soon. It's not going to solve all our problems, but it gets us damn close. So, could you talk us through what Rewiring America's biggest successes have been? Because you are trying to get electrification to people.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for having me and for hosting this conversation. I think the thing that is really not known to people about the damn close part is that 42% of our energy-related emissions come from basically 5 decisions that we make at our kitchen tables, maybe 6. Kind of cars you drive, how you heat the water, air and water in your homes, how you cook your food, dry your clothes, maybe whether you get solar on your rooftop. That's 42% of our energy-related emissions. Those kitchen table decisions are really, for the most of us, the largest climate impact we will have in our lives, or have the opportunity to have. And so there is this really incredible opportunity to shift the locus of agency and power to the kitchen table. And what we've been trying to do at Rewiring America is tell that story and then empower households in those kitchen table decisions through a combination of policy incentives and tools that they can use to actually make those decisions the easy ones to go forward with and get the benefits of in the process.
And so far, what have been your biggest successes?
Well, it's not our success alone, certainly, but the Inflation Reduction Act was something that we were really involved with in shaping, because what we recognized was that the upfront costs of these better electric machines are too expensive still for too many households. And so the Inflation Reduction Act has a lot of these kitchen table incentives for people that could be as much as $500 billion going to households over the next decade. And we were very involved in shaping that.
Right. And Stacey, now working on energy and environment issues is not something that's new to you. It goes as far as back as your senior thesis in college, I understand. And of course, it's featured in your work in public office and your campaigns. Now, you've been with Rewiring America for over a year. What are the biggest barriers that you still see are remaining in trying to get people to recognize that electrifying their lives is beneficial to them, even before it is beneficial to the planet?
I think the challenge is not convincing people it's beneficial, it's convincing people it's accessible. Because for the low-income, moderate-income families that are facing this challenge, they hear the specter of climate action, but they often see the behavior of people who are wealthier, who can afford to make choices. And so often it feels like sacrifice. It doesn't feel like progress. And I think the important piece of the work Rewiring has done, the incredible investment that comes from the Inflation Reduction Act, is that it shifts the conversation from one of, can I afford it, to how do I get it? When people get to make decisions that benefit their lives, they are much more likely to do so. We like getting stuff. And people like being cooler in the summer, they like being warmer in the winter, they like their power bills going down. And what we have to do is actually create the space for them to understand that's doable for the first time. You mentioned that I have been working on these issues for a very long time. Most people aren't aware that that's part of my portfolio. But I grew up in southern Mississippi. I grew up near Cancer Alley in Louisiana. I grew up in petrochemical corridors where communities were often not served and where it seemed impossible for progress to happen. I lived in a community in college where the juxtaposition of where I went to school and where my older sister went to school was very distinct. And so a large part of this is just letting people know what's available, what's possible, and that they can afford it. Because this is a moment, to Ari's point about it being a kitchen table issue, every kitchen table can solve this problem because there's money to help you. And so part of the work of rewiring, in fact, the core of rewiring is helping people understand all of the money that's available, all of the tools that are available, and then shifting their belief system to know that they get to benefit. They just have to believe it's possible.
Right. And Ari, you talked about the Inflation Reduction Act. It's a big bill. It does many things. How specifically have you been able to use what the IRA has put out for the work that you've done with Rewiring America?
Yeah, well, one of the first things that we did was we built a calculator for households to access to understand what they were eligible for in the Inflation Reduction Act itself. We've had almost 1 million households access that over the past 2 years while these benefits are coming online, and we haven't spent $1 advertising for that. And because, to Stacey's point, people like getting stuff, but they don't know how to navigate. And so the first thing that we have done is really start investing in these tools to help make that kitchen table conversation personal and accessible, to Stacey's point, for every household in the country. That's really important because most people don't think about this stuff on a day in and day out basis. I work with a lot of people who are climate geeks. I still haven't met someone who says, I can't wait for the new model of the water heater to come out because I'm totally upgrading next year. That's not a conversation people have.
Yeah.
At least not most people. And so we've been really focused on creating the sort of the access points and the on-ramps for households. And then the other thing that we did, and that Stacey and I have been working on over the last year and change, is that we put together a coalition to apply for something called the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. And we were selected for $2 billion to really create a way forward for low and moderate income households in communities so that every kitchen table is able to participate and afford these improvements.
Now, the Inflation Reduction Act came up very first answer, and it's crucial because none of this happens without policy. And policy doesn't happen without politics. Now, on so many issues, including on climate, there is a clear choice at the 2024 election. And Stacey, you said it, the choice is not Donald Trump. But that means we must face the inescapable question, which is, then who? And you wrote an op-ed yesterday saying that it must be, the Democratic nominee for president must be Joe Biden. Yes. Why is that?
He is our president, he is our nominee, and he will be president again if we do the work necessary to make it so. But let's be clear, we would not have the Inflation Reduction Act, we would not have the billions of dollars that are being poured into communities of color, into low-income communities, into rural communities, into Native American communities, but for President Joe Biden. We know that, we know absolutely that these dollars will be transformative. In Georgia, one of the ways Rewiring has been incredibly prescient in thinking about this, we are doing demonstration projects around the country in Milwaukee, in Gresham, Oregon, in Tulsa, Oklahoma, in East Point, Georgia, and in DeSoto, Georgia. There's a lot of Georgia. I get to be a part of it, so there's a lot of Georgia. But in DeSoto, Georgia, we're actually making certain that every household that wants something is getting the investment of an upgraded appliance. We have a woman who was living without running water in her home because she couldn't afford to upgrade her water heater. It had rusted out, and she's an elderly woman, Mildred Carter, 75, and was just going across the street to her neighbor's house to get water. Because of the monies that are going to come in, because of the work of rewiring, she got a new water heater. There was a family that was living in a double-wide trailer without central air, with kids, 3 generations of families. They now have central air for the first time in their lives. This is life-changing work.
Yeah.
that would not be possible but for President Joe Biden. So my commitment to his reelection is that not only do I know what he is doing, I know what the other guy said he promises to do, which is to dismantle, disassociate, and destroy what is possible for the future. And so for me, there is no choice but to make certain that we reelect Joe Biden.
Right. And we are asking these questions because of the poor performance at the first presidential debate. Now, you say that any alternative, say you go to an open convention, is likely to lead to a divide among Democrats. And you say that the focus should be among Democrats, not infighting, but trying to defeat Trump. Any other nominee, and I say in quotes, won't have, according to you, the campaign infrastructure, resources, or significant national record. But sounds like Kamala Harris has all of that. So if Joe Biden does step down, would you support Harris to be the nominee?
I don't do hypotheticals when we are 3.5 months from an existential crisis in this country. We have a president who will become the nominee in mid-August, who will become the next president if we do the work between now and then. I support the Biden-Harris administration, but there is one person who is the nominee for president for the Democratic Party, and that is Joe Biden, and that is who I support.
Right. So I appreciate that answer. Now, one of the things that you've...
Wasn't enough, Bill.
You've...
not my first rodeo. Come on.
You've been crucial in turning the vote out in Georgia. In 2020, you got enough votes out to turn the state blue, to ensure that the Senate has a Democratic majority. And you said you don't do hypotheticals, but...
No, I didn't say ever. But go ahead.
But if...
I write books, so I do hypotheticals all the time. Just depends on the situation. But let's see if you can reach that.
So, if Biden stays on, polls show that currently people aren't as excited about going to vote for Joe Biden. Are you worried that there won't be enough of a turnout to be able to defeat Donald Trump?
People don't care about your politics. They care about their lives. They vote based on their needs. We need a president who has demonstrated for the last 3.5 years an assiduous commitment to saving our planet and, more importantly, saving our lives. We need someone who has demonstrated through word and deed the understanding of the crisis that we face in our environment and also has a detailed and dedicated plan. The work of winning an election is not simply who is running. It's not just what's on the ballot, it's who's in the booth. And to get people into the booth, you have groups like Rewiring America, a nonpartisan organization that exists to tell people what's possible. When people know I can get an HVAC system so that I can stay cool in the sweltering heat of Seattle, which is a strange... when they know that in the winter, when delivered fuels start to increase in cost, and they now have an upgraded system that lets them stay warm in the winter without having to sacrifice health care for energy costs. That's the choice that we're asking people to make. President Biden is the right person to be on the ballot, but the work of winning an election is about who you get to show up to the booth, and that's the work of everyone who cares about the future of this country. And so I'm not concerned. I'm committed. And our job is to convince every person who shares that value system and wants to see that future to show up and do the same work and get more people to vote.
Yeah. I had the honor of serving in the Obama White House. And in 2012, we had economic data that showed that everything was getting better. And when we did polling, people felt like it wasn't getting better in their day-to-day lives. And today, inflation numbers came out showing that it's easing, setting up an opportunity for the Fed to do an interest rate cut. And so we talk about that in terms of macroeconomic issues. But at the kitchen table, It is a different story. And the thing that just to connect the dots here, the reason why this is very important to our political future and very important to our climate future is that electrification and making these decisions is anti-inflationary to people's day-to-day lives because they trade out a $500 bill for a $100 bill. But it's also anti-inflationary because the most inflationary force in the history of humankind is climate change.
So one of the things that has been surprising to me as somebody who lives in the UK watching the Inflation Reduction Act play out, there are so many things that are being done that are going to help reduce emissions, reduce inflation, reduce the bills that people pay for energy while making decarbonization happen. But they've still not been appreciated by people. People don't know the Inflation Reduction Act, most people, right? And you said you have this tool that has gone on to 1 million people, million households that have used this tool to try and figure out how to electrify their homes. There are 100 million households in America. And so there is still a gap between doing, which is important, and showing to people what you have done, because that is what will get the vote to turn out. So how are you working to bridge that gap? Because that gap is very big.
It's big and it's important, and it is also common sense. Most people don't think about what's happening in Washington day in, day out. Most people don't read 7,000-page legislative texts, as compelling as they might be. People are just trying to make do. And then the other part of this is that we live in a status quo environment that is a fossil fuel environment. So when your furnace conks out or when your water heater stops working and you need to figure out what to do, again, you don't think about that stuff on a day in and day out basis. So when you call somebody to go replace it or fix it, what they tend to do is do a like for like swap. So the thing that has pipes in your house that connects to the pipe sticking out of your wall, when the contractor comes with their van, they have a thing that has pipes sticking out of the back to connect to the pipe sticking out of your wall. And if at that point in time you say, I heard something on a podcast about a heat pump, what's that? Like, that's not a great time to have that conversation. And so we need to cut through and get to people about the benefit and the value to them, but also get the friction out of the process so that it's easier. And that is what we are incredibly focused on. And the way we think about it is that our job is to make it easy for you. And the you in that phrase is anybody in the 129 million households in America. And for you, it is going to be different based on where you live, what your circumstances are. And we have to make it easy for the you in that context to be able to move forward.
Stacey, say the big question that we are grappling with right now. We move on from that. Joe Biden remains presidential nominee. What do you think the next 3 months should look like to get the vote out for Joe Biden?
So it's conversations like this. It's explaining to the people who understand what's at stake what they can do. It's making sure that people know about Rewiring's home calculator so they can figure it out. It's making sure they know that they can take advantage of state rebates that are now coming online. It's connecting the dots between the pain they feel and the opportunity to solve that pain. That's what canvassing is. That's what organizing is. That's what campaigning is. And so we have a lot of work to do. To your point, not as many people know about it because it's shocking, but in government, things move slowly. Yeah. And so even though the Inflation Reduction Act passed in 23, it has taken time to deploy that much money. Those dollars are now coming online. So part of the responsibility for anyone who is of good conscience is to share this information. When you're on social media, talk about what you know. People get most of their information about kitchen table decisions from people that they know. And so part of our responsibility, one of the ways we not only proselytize about the IRA, but proselytize about the climate future we can have, is by convincing average folks who are voters to talk to people who may not be voters, who may not think they need to be voters, but who want their lives to be better. And they need to understand that if you vote, you get this. If you don't vote, you lose this. And right now, people don't know what's at stake, and so that's the next 3 months, connecting the dot between what's at stake and what is possible. And we have one person who is making possibility real, and that's the person that we're going to support for president.
And Ari, now, you're a nonpartisan, you're leading Rewiring America, which is nonpartisan. There is a real specter of Donald Trump getting elected and a bunch of climate policies being dismantled. So if that happens, how are you preparing Rewiring America to do the work that it does right now?
Well, I guess I would just say the importance of making these policies relevant for people at their kitchen tables is also a very important strategy for protecting the policies, because people tend to pay attention to how the math works out at their kitchen table, and if the math is working out because of a set of policies, they tend to want to keep those policies. We've seen that over and over again. There has been, in solar, the investment tax credit, how many times has it been going away in U.S. policy as it expires? And it gets continued, and it gets continued because there is a benefit to people. So our job is to do the work of what you were just saying, of connecting it to people and making people understand the policy, because that is in essence, the political insurance around what these investments are.
Now, we have seen a term of Donald Trump in power. If he does come to power again, and you've been quite forthright about what it could mean for America, what is at stake, not just in climate, but beyond it. In the op-ed you say, former President Donald Trump has made it clear his plan is to be dictator on day one. How does your work change if Trump returns to White House?
One, we do the work to make certain that doesn't happen, and part of that is to explain what's possible. Under the current term, or the just completed term of the Supreme Court, the Chevron decision, the Chevron deference decision, means that the EPA, the Clean Water Act, all of the work to protect our climate could be vitiated with the stroke of a pen. A lesser-known decision was the Snyder decision, which says that it's now legal to bribe local officials, that the federal law that precludes that bribery is now permitted. Well, if you're looking at public utility commissions that are making decisions, if you don't have oversight and they can get money, I invite all of you to engage in one hypothetical of what could possibly happen. And so I think our responsibility is to, as Ari said, we've got to connect people to these moments. The way you preclude a Trump administration is by doing the work to re-elect the current administration. But more importantly, we've got to take ourselves out of the conversation of what's happening in Washington and take it back to what can happen in my life. If there's the removal of a regulatory body that says that you shouldn't have to breathe in dirty air, if there is the removal of a regulatory body that tells companies they can't pollute where you live, that's a real consequence. And it's not a hypothetical. The law now permits that to happen, and it is only those who are in power who can stop it and make it not so. And so our job is to absolutely ensure that we explain what could happen, and we also explain how you stop it from becoming so. It's not rocket science, but it is hard work. And the work of telling people this is the work that Rewiring is doing, not through the lens of partisan decision, but through the conversation of power, because ultimately that's what all this is about. This is a power dynamic, and we need to decide who has the power, us or them. And by us, I mean the people who need to be able to take care of themselves, their families, their lives, and their communities. And if we believe that we have that power, then we can make the choices that makes that power real.
So, Ari, final question. Say Joe Biden does get elected, and 2025, you have a second term. You were gunning for the Inflation Reduction Act in the first term. What kind of big major policy would you want to see in the next term that could make electrification easier?
Well, it's not just at the federal level. It's across the country. Stacey mentioned PUCs. To engage in the hypothetical, if you have a machine that you can buy that is 3 to 5 times more efficient than the fossil fuel counterpart, and it costs you more on your energy bills, You can ask yourself why that's happening, and it's happening because of how the energy prices are set between fossil fuels and electricity prices. That's a choice that's being made. It's a choice that gets made regionally, a choice that gets made locally. So we need to really be focused on getting the friction out for the household, and the incentives are a piece of that, and there's more that can be done federally. But we also need to be really focused on pushing the cost down for households. That is because of choices that we're making at a federal, state, local level from a policy perspective that is artificially inflating costs, creating friction that inflates cost, creating sort of less transparency that inflates cost. And there's a bunch of work to do in all of that.
So, I mean, the climate problem is really complicated, and you have to do the nuts and bolts, and that's really important. But the vision is important too. So I haven't heard a big policy that you would want in the next term. Do you have one of those in your back pocket that you're pushing for?
I think the big policy vision is making it easier for people. And because that is step one in the Inflation Reduction Act was a bunch of carrots that were important that people can access. But there is a lot of work to do to make it easier. And I think the way I would describe it is that if we think about the household as the consumer of the policy and are focused on the household as the consumer of the policy, then the policy vision should be to make it easy for you. And anything that touches that is sort of in the lines, and we should be working on.
Thank you, Aries. Thank you, Stacey.
Thank you.
Thank you.